Okay, does everybody agree that there's something wrong with these 4 photos? Yes, I agree. There are grammatical errors in each one. Now, does this distract anyone from what these signs are trying to say? It bothers me too. Grammatical errors like these have always been my biggest pet peeve, and this led me to research the effects that these kind of mistakes have in a business and educational setting. I'm Megan Waterfield, and I'm going to be sharing some of my primary and secondary research on the importance of grammar from different age and professional standpoints. Rebecca Sipe shares in her article, Grammar Matters, that when she began teaching middle school in Anchorage, Alaska, she was given a full set of literature books, but only 1 grammar book. The school district had replaced these original grammar books with ones that teach grammar in a more simple way. She noticed that her students' writing were filled with grammatical errors, and she knew that she had to fix it. So instead of doing these meaningless exercises in this workbook, she had her students analyze newspapers and journal entries and pick out different usages and styles of writing by the authors. She noticed that this helped her students' writing greatly, and the kids said that they finally had an understanding of grammar by studying these real-life examples. Sipe is now an English professor at Eastern Michigan University, and she continues to say in her article that writing is essential to think critically and to learn anything. This builds on her argument that yes, grammar does in fact matter, and in the case of her students, having them finally understand grammar was beneficial. Kyle Lyons, CEO of iFixit.com, shares his stance on grammar in his article, I Won't Hire People Who Use Poor Grammar. Here's why. He requires his employees to take a grammar test, primarily because his company writes online repair manuals for miscellaneous objects, but also because Lyons believes good grammar makes good business sense. People argued with Lyons that grammar had nothing to do with job performance, creativity, or intelligence, but Lyons noticed that the employees who made fewer mistakes on the grammar test made fewer mistakes in the workplace. These same people were also more detail-oriented, an important skill to have in the programming business. So Lyons ends his article by saying that most applicants say that they're detail-oriented on paper, but he just makes them prove it. So after reading a few more articles like the 2 I just shared, I decided to ask some of my peers at Mount Union about their knowledge on some basic grammar concepts. This is a copy of the survey I handed out. I asked my peers about their knowledge on commas, apostrophes, who versus whom, and if they ever diagram sentences, an exercise I did for the first time this semester. The results are shown here. As you can see, most people responded negatively to my questions, but I wasn't necessarily surprised after all my research. The statistic that stands out to me the most, though, is that 80% of the students I asked still have confusion with commas and apostrophes. I think it's kind of ridiculous that college kids aren't confident with this concept because we started learning this early on in grade school. I think my research supports Sipe's article that students really don't know how to write correctly, and I think it reinforces the idea that maybe it's a good idea for Lyons to hand out grammar tests to his employees, because it says something about that applicant's education and their attention to detail. So after doing this little survey and reading more articles about this topic, I decided to ask a peer of mine, my first-year seminar professor, my mom, and my grandfather, if they thought that good grammar was an important skill to have. I decided to ask this range of people because I wanted to see if their answers would vary based on their age, and as anticipated, they did. My peer said, who is a freshman at Mount Union, said that grammar is only somewhat important because as long as you can understand what the person is saying, that's all that really matters. She admitted to me that she uses spell check in text messages and essays, but that she doesn't think that it's really important for us to know it because we have the technology to do it for us. When I handed out the survey that I just showed you, I kind of got the consensus like, oh, why are you doing this? Like, nobody really cares. So I wasn't necessarily surprised by her answer. However, as age increases with those whom I interviewed, the opinions changed. My mom said that good grammar is crucial to communicate with professors, bosses, leaders, or anyone who you want to make a good impression on. She says that good grammar makes you sound more educated, and the more you practice it, the easier it becomes to use. Now, my mom is somewhat of a grammar freak, so it makes sense what she was saying, but she does have a point. The more you would practice speaking correctly, the easier it would become, like riding a bike or speaking in front of a crowd. You just have to practice. My first-year seminar professor, who works in the physical education department here at Mount Union, took this question a little differently. He said that when he's grading a paper filled with grammatical errors, that it distracts him from the content of the paper and even has him question the accuracy of the document as a whole. I was intrigued to get this response from a health professor as opposed to an English professor, but that just reinforces the idea that grammar is important no matter where you end up. Finally, I asked my grandfather, who's an avid grammarian, this question. He told me that he cares more about how people spoke when he grew up, the long-standing customs of English as he described, rather than now, where we're more lenient with our usage and we don't really care. He says that he goes by the norms that indicate how a language should or should not be used rather than how a language is used. So basically, he follows the rules of proper grammar that he learned in grade school. So after becoming somewhat of an expert on this topic, after my interview, survey, and research, I still stand with my opinion that grammar is a very important skill to have. I've yet to research the contrary, but I don't think it'll change my mind. I grew up with a family that was obsessed with having correct grammar, so by instinct, I think that it's a necessity to have. It's also pretty easy for me. For example, during the SAT and ACT tests that I had to take for school, the writing sections were the most successful and easiest parts for me. I almost looked forward to them because it was like a break for my brain. As my mother said earlier, it has become second nature to me because I grew up with constant corrections from her and my grandparents and even my older brother. So going back to the first slide I showed you, silly grammatical mistakes like misusing the comma and apostrophe drive me insane when it's out in the open for anyone to see. I just want to get out my red pen and correct it. So I'd like to close with my favorite quote that I found while researching, as said by Kyle Lyons. Good grammar is credibility. Your words are all you have. And for better or worse, people will judge you if you can't tell the difference between there, and there. Thank you, and are there any questions?